Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's your host, College Football with Sam, and today we will be discussing my top 10 college football teams entering Week 5 of this season. Before we get any further in the video, please make sure to drop your own list of top 10 college football teams down in the comment section below. And also remember to subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you can get notified when I drop my weekly top 10 videos, along with other preview and prediction and reaction and analysis videos and other college football content. Thank you guys so much, and without further ado, we'll start at number 10 and obviously end this video at number 1. The Washington State Cougars enter my top 10. Now, this is a team that I might be too bullish on for my own good, but I was very high on Oregon State for a variety of good reasons, most notably their offensive line play, the fact that they have one of the Pac-12's more stout defenses, at least I thought so, and they have a great running back room, and offensively with Silas Bolden at wide receiver and DJ Uiagalelei at quarterback, I thought that they were very efficient. And they're still a good football team. In fact, I have them near my top 10. But Washington State manhandled them through the air. And Cameron Ward, I think there should be serious consideration for him to be a Heisman Trophy winner, potentially. Cameron Ward on the year has 1,390 passing yards, 13 passing touchdowns. And right now, he has a 187 passer rating. And he was, until the game against Oregon State, leading the Cougars in rushing yards as well. Now that's been taken over by running back Nakia Watson. But they have great players at wide receiver, tight end. They have a good defense, one of the better defenses in the Pac-12, in my opinion. And Jake Dickert, he's a rising name in head coaching circles. I can guarantee you that. Nakia Watson and Cameron Ward both are only slightly over 100 total rushing yards on the season. Their passing offense is this team's biggest strength. I think the weakness isn't any part of the defense or special teams. I think it's the fact that the offense is almost one-dimensional. It's a purely passing offense, and right now it's working, but it's hard to be one-dimensional and be successful on offense or defense or as a college football team, period, amen. But their rivals, the Washington Huskies, who are much higher on this list, are sort of doing so as their main running back Cameron Davis is injured. So maybe Washington State can mirror the Huskies and be a one-dimensional passing team that also has a pretty stout defense as well. So at 4-0, 1-0 in the Pac-12, I have the Washington State Cougars at number 10. I think this is the spot that, from my angle, is the most up for debate in terms of top 10 placement. At number 9, we have the Utah Utes. I don't think this one's very debatable. If it is, there's an argument that Utah could be higher on this list. I'm still cautious about them because Brant Kuithe, the tight end, isn't back yet. And with Cameron Rising, I saw this intriguing and I think thought-provoking Twitter post by college football nerds. They have a wonderful college football channel on YouTube where they deep dive into analytics, and they provide really great analysis. You should check out their channel. If you're watching this channel, you probably already know who they are. But they sent out a tweet that basically said Cameron Rising right now and his status of being back is no different than JT Daniels' status of being back while Stetson Bennett was the starter at Georgia. And I think that's a good point. Nate Johnson has now started, I think, 3 games or maybe 2 games, but played significant playing time in the other 2 games he didn't start in. He's been a significant contributor to Utah's success and to Utah's offense for all 4 games. And the Utes are 4-0, 1-0. They've had multiple one-score wins over Baylor on the road and also over UCLA at home. They dominated Florida in week 1. I think their coaching staff is their biggest strength. I think that with Andy Ludwig, Morgan Scaley, the coordinators, and then Kyle Whittingham as the head coach, and their strength and conditioning staff and their position coaches are some of the best in all of college football. The weakness of this team, I think, is fairly obvious. It's team health. Brant Kuthi and Cameron Rising are some of the best players in their respective positions in college football, and having them continually be out just hurts. It hurts this team's chances of maximizing their win total. I think the Utes defense is the best in the Pac-12, though. I think Oregon State falling the way they did. Meanwhile, Utah holding UCLA to 7 points and getting a pick six on Dante Moore, I think is evidence that this is the best defense in the Pac-12. The Utes have elite players at running back, tight end, and also on the defensive line, but they're dealing with so many injuries. And as I said in my previous video, if they heal up, and also if they continue to win, they will rise in my rankings. I had them preseason as number 5 in all of college football. At number 8, we have the Texas Longhorns. They played a great game against Baylor in week 4, and in that game, their biggest weakness was special teams. Their defense looked elite. Their offense looked elite. Greg McElroy says that he thinks this is the most complete team in college football. Now, I say humbly because I think Greg McElroy knows more about the game of football than I'll ever know. I humbly disagree with him there. But having your biggest weakness be special teams, I think is indicative of a very complete team. Very. They had 2 muffed kickoffs against the Baylor Bears. And this happened with Texas against Oklahoma in 2021. It's happened a few other times. Their special teams has never been something that Texas has been uber strong at under Steve Sarkisian. I think that after that Baylor game, I have to consider it a weakness for now. But they destroyed Baylor when many, and myself included, thought that Baylor could compete for a few quarters or a half. The Longhorns now move on to 4-0, 1-0 in conference in the Big 12 in their last year. And speaking of their last year before they moved to the SEC, their win over SEC opponent Alabama looks better after the Crimson Tide beat Ole Miss and covered the spread. The kickoff muffs need to be fixed immediately in a tight game, more likely one that's an offensive shootout, but even, a defensive slugfest. One turnover can, just end the game in your opponent's favor. That has to end. The Longhorns do have elite players at wide receiver, like Xavier Worthy, Jordan Whittington, and also Quinn Ewers. He's a quarterback who's improving. I'm not going to consider him an elite quarterback yet, but he's getting there. The way he played against Baylor really impressed me. And then at tight end with Jatavion Sanders, he is one of the best tight ends in the nation. And then on the offensive line and the defensive line, Texas is becoming very stout in the trenches as well. They will move up this list if they just continue to win games. Remember, if you think your team or you think a team in this list is too low, this is mainly eye test at this point in the season, and also looking at advanced metrics like efficiency and somewhat including strength of record. But it is very early in the season, and strength of record, I think, is relative and subjective, especially looking at a year where the SEC looks very down, for example, and the Pac-12 was a weak reputation, looks like the deepest conference in college football. So if your team just continues to win, and if they impress, and if they dominate on the field, not just by the scoreboard, they will move up the list, and Texas, after their win over Baylor, is certainly poised to do that. A team who isn't poised to do that, but they played a higher quality opponent, it was a rivalry game, so I treat this differently, is the Florida State Seminoles. The Seminoles have struggled now for 2 weeks in a row, and it's a good thing that they came out in those tough matchups with wins, but if they don't start dominating some of their weaker competition in the ACC, that's not a good sign. Their rush offense right now is not good. Their skill position players are phenomenal. Jordan Travis, amazing. I think Keon Coleman has 6 receiving touchdowns on the year. When you have elite players at wide receiver, tight end, defensive end, and corner, and then your offensive system is unique, you can attack all different kinds of defenses. Even though Florida State is a run offense, the fact that they're having so much success with the deep pass is phenomenal. And I have been impressed with how Mike Norvell and offensive coordinator Alex Atkins have found ways to win and how they've adapted the offense to different defenses and different situations. However, the rush offense and also the rush defense, perhaps more importantly, they need to improve. Against Clemson, they only allowed around 3 to 3.5 yards per carry, maybe a little higher than that, but definitely under 4. And they allowed around 125 rushing yards. Against Boston College Eagles were able to run the football in short distances as well. And this defense with Adam Fuller as the DC does have vulnerabilities. So being able to lock down the run defense while also being able to run the football, that will allow Florida State to control games in a more efficient manner. Right now, in the past 2 weeks, Florida State has not had impressive game control. In fact, I think their game control has been rather poor, allowing Boston College to be competitive with them, then fade away, then come back and nearly take control of the game. And against Clemson, they needed a defensive score to come out with a win, and they needed deep plays. So the way Florida State is winning, I don't know if that's sustainable, if they can do that consistently. I think there are changes that need to be made. But the Florida State Seminoles are number 7 on this list. And at number 6 are the Oregon Ducks, rising from number 9. What they did to Colorado was better than I anticipated. I thought that Oregon would score, I think my score prediction was 59-28. That Oregon would cover. I thought that that was kind of a gimme pick. But that Colorado would be able to throw the ball on an Oregon defense that I thought had some vulnerabilities. Well, it turns out that doesn't matter because Oregon, they have Jordan Birch, a great defensive end, and they reloaded a bit at secondary and also at other defensive positions where they lost starters compared to last year. Their performance was amazing. Their overall offense, whether it's Bucky Irving, Noah Whittington, or Bo Nix, Troy Franklin at wide receiver, and then Ferguson, the tight end, they have amazing players. And also Jackson Powers Johnson, I think, is the second highest rated center according to Pro Football Focus. This offense is one of the best in the nation, honestly. And I also saw that if you take Bill Connolly's S&P Plus rankings and you factor out the preseason metrics, Oregon and Washington are the 2 best teams in the country, according to Bill Connolly. So maybe I'm underrating the Ducks here. I don't think I am. I still think there are questions about their rush defense. We haven't seen any team outside of maybe Texas Tech who was able to run on them who's had a competent rushing offense. I mean, Colorado was one of the worst rushing offenses in the country, and that's with some talented running backs. They just have such a horrible offensive line that can't open up holes in the run game, and it can't protect Shedeur Sanders as well. But this team has elite players at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, offensive line. They're known for their speed. I think they have great players in the trenches defensively. Their special teams, too. Just the way that everything executed for Oregon in week 4 against Colorado was to perfection. I mean, having Casey Rogers take that snap on the fake field goal, that's, I think, a sign of confidence in his whole team, in the special teams unit that Dan Lanning signaled. And the way they dismantled Colorado was just impressive. I mean, that was a Georgia versus TCU level dismantling. That was a Ohio State versus Michigan State in 2021 level dismembering. It was impressive. The rush defense has yet to be tested, but this team is rising through my rankings. And if the Ducks continue to dominate on all sides of the football and in all position groups and facets of the game, they will continue to rise in my rankings. Probably inside of my top 4, if not higher. I think Oregon and Washington, as long as both teams take care of business, is nearly guaranteed to be a top 10 matchup, which I think might be the first time in the history of that rivalry where both teams were in the top 10 when they faced each other off. But whatever. If I'm right about that, please tell me in the comments section down below. We have Penn State breaking into our top 5. Last week they were number 6. They're 4-0. They're 2-0 in the Big Ten. Overall, their defense looks elite. I still think that interior trench play, offensively and defensively, has some concerns. But if it's defensive end, linebacker, corner, safety for Penn State, there are elite players on every other position on the defense outside of defensive tackle. And offensively, Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, I know that they're not having explosive years, but I still think that's an elite running back duo. And Penn State has some great offensive tackles. They have the number one offensive tackle prospect in Olu Fashanu, and they have great tight ends as well. And a defensive staff that has great position coaches, and a DC in Manny Diaz who is aggressive and creative. I'm not very high on him, but by not very high on him, I mean I don't regard him as a top 5 defensive coordinator. I still regard him as a top 15, probably maybe top 10 defensive coordinator. Still highly regarded in my mind, just not as high as many others. Penn State's careful. They're careful, they're methodical, they can adapt, they don't turn over the football. They're the only team in college football left who has yet to turn over the football. Very impressive stuff. And Abdul Carter, Kalen King, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, I'm naming different kinds of defensive players from different positions. They're all near elite, if not elite. I mean, this defense is talented. It has the potential to be, at the end of the year, looked back on as the most talented defense in all of college football. The trenches, as I've mentioned earlier, are the only area for me that cause concern. At wide receiver, they don't have great depth, but Lambert Smith, he's filling in that wide receiver one role quite well, and Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson are great red zone targets. And Drew Aller right now has thrown no interceptions. He has a 149 passer rating, and he's shown that he's capable of also taking off and scrambling to pick up key first downs as well. So the Nittany Lions at number 5, I'm actually higher on them than the AP poll is. I still think that they're third right now in the Big Ten, but they're closing that gap that I think they had in the preseason with Ohio State and Michigan. At number 4, we have the Georgia Bulldogs. Their defense, I know they gave up 21 points to UAB, but I have to give credit to Glenn Schumann, Will Muschamp, and also Kirby Smart, the guy who totally puts that defense together and has established that culture of having elite smash mouth defensive man ball football in Sanford. Georgia's a great football team. In fact, I'd say they're a near elite football team, more accurately. They're 4th right now because they just continue, in my mind, to not look like the most dominant team in college football. They're 4-0, 1-0 in conference. Their last non-conference game of the year is against rival Georgia Tech at the end of the year, who they should destroy. No one on the regular season schedule looks capable of beating this team, in my mind, let alone playing within double digits, within 10 points of this Bulldog squad. They still look uninterested. I don't think that them allowing 21 points to UAB or, against whether it's University, Tennessee Martin, or Ball State, how it took a while for them to get going in those games, should be much cause for concern. However, Georgia has had some inconsistencies on both sides of the football. Carson Beck is improving. They have elite players at tight end. The offensive line, much like Michigan's, for example, those are 2 elite offensive lines from last year who returned a lot of production or who replaced their production with elite transfers, and they haven't exactly reached expectations yet. But like Michigan's, I'm going to give Georgia's O-line benefit of the doubt. They have the nation's best center in Cedric Van Pran. I think they're going to get it figured out there. And defensively, of course, Georgia has guys like Malachi Starks. Michael Williams should be healthy for this week's game at Auburn. I got that from Uncle Lou. Apparently he was injured for either a week or a few weeks. He's a star defensive end. If Georgia just establishes more dominance and they continue to just be on point, I think they'll rise in my rankings, and I do think they'll be undefeated at the end of the year. No one in the SEC, I think, can compete with this team, and that includes Alabama, that includes LSU. Georgia, by a mile, is the most complete team in all of the SEC. Don't think it's even close. At number 3, we have the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State fell in my rankings despite beating a good team, a great team in Notre Dame last week. And the reason for that is I think Notre Dame, as good as they are, especially in the trenches, I don't think they're a near elite team. I think that Notre Dame has limitations, and I think Ohio State showed some areas of concern against the Fighting Irish. Their defense looks like one of the nation's best against Notre Dame. I know they struggled against the run late, but it took a while for Notre Dame to be able to open up the ground game against the Buckeyes, and the Buckeye defense was still able to buckle up and bow up and eventually force a punt, which led to that game-winning drive by Kyle McCord, Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison Jr., Cade Stover, and also Chip Trainum at the end of the game, who had, I think, 6 rushing attempts and only 13 yards, but he did have that final score at the end to give the Buckeyes the lead and the win. Ohio State has elite players at wide receiver, running back, defensive tackle, linebacker, corner, and safety, along with an elite offensive staff. Their defense is similar to Penn State's, and that their weakness is on the D-line, but it's at a different part of the D-line. Tuimolau for now has not impressed me, or has not improved compared to last year as much as I thought he would. Sawyer has impressed me, but he's still not playing at that elite level. Meanwhile, Mike Hall, Tyleik Williams, Ty Hamilton, I'm always seeing them making plays up front and getting into the backfield and trying their hardest. I think the defensive tackle spot for Ohio State is the strength of this D-line, and the defensive end spot, ironically enough, is the weakness. If the offense could be elite, this team would probably be number 1, maybe number 2, but I think with an elite offense, if they had last year's offense with this defense, they'd potentially easily be the number 1 team in college football right now. Their overall defense is a strength. Their entire offensive line, mostly at tackle, has not played up to an elite standard by now. Obviously, having a position like offensive tackle be a weakness is a problem. On the interior, I still think they're playing great, but they can play better than they are right now. And I think at the end of the year, and maybe over the bye, Ryan Day and Justin Fry will figure this out. I think there will be some improvements and changes. Another thing that I want to mention before we move on to my number 2 and number 1 teams is Ohio State needs to play to their strengths. For the past 4 games, they've been playing to their weaknesses, like running stretch. That's the biggest one, I think, is running stretch. The offensive line is built to run power up the middle halfback dive football, not stretch football to get big plays. So if Ryan Day adapts to the team's strengths and if the offense continues to improve, this team will bounce back in my rankings. And for them to be number 3, I still classify them as an elite team in college football. However, the Washington Huskies, with the number 1 offense in college football, a defense that currently is 21st according to ESPN in efficiency metrics, and dominant performances every week, the Huskies are the number 2 team for me. And if they continue to perform at the level they are, and like I said last week, all other teams' performances are also held constant like Washington's, they will rise to number 1. They play at Arizona this weekend. I might be previewing that game just because Washington's a future Big Ten team, and Arizona's 3-1, and they're 1-0 in the Pac-12 with a win over Stanford last minute, much like Washington is 1-0 in the Pac-12, but with a dominant win over California. So if they can dominate Arizona, and that's likely going to be the case, and they continue to do this, they're eventually going to play Oregon. If they beat Oregon, especially in dominant fashion, they'll probably be number 1 here, because their weakness, much like Texas's, is special teams. Their defense looked great against Cal. I know they allowed 32 points, but most of those points were in the second half. They led 45-12 at half. They forced 3 turnovers. They had a punt return for a touchdown. They're an amazing team everywhere. I mean, the chemistry that Penix has with his receivers and tight ends and the protection that he has is unreal. Washington has elite players everywhere except for running back offensively. And a large part of that being the case is Cameron Davis's injury. I thought he was going to be a top 25 running back this year. It sucks that he's injured. Hopefully he's healing. And I also think Washington has an elite duo of defensive ends. I think the way that they get pressure on opposing teams with Braden Trice and their opposite defensive end, whose name escapes me, is great. And their offensive staff, much like Ohio State's, but I think right now, probably more so than Ohio State's, is elite. The Huskies' defense has a high ceiling as well. They force turnovers, they can get pressure. They also have proven that they can limit the run. So I'm curious to see, especially when they face off against Oregon, how good this defense will be. But it feels and it looks like the defense has a high ceiling, and with the offense that the Huskies have, that is intimidating. That's a very intimidating idea in my head. And then at number 1, we have the Michigan Wolverines. Their strength is their team efficiency. They have been college football's most dominant team. I don't think most impressive, though. I think that Washington, the way that they take opponents to church, to be quite frank, the way that they, behead opposing teams is more impressive. But the way that Michigan controls games and how they establish rhythm, how they take more than 30 seconds off the play clock every play and score on most of their drives, that's impressive as well. And I think certainly they're the most efficient team in the country right now. Their weakness is offensive tackle. I don't think they played bored against Rutgers whatsoever. I think that the level of effort that I saw against the Scarlet Knights was increased, perhaps dramatically, compared to Bowling Green, and more or less so compared to weeks 1 and 2 as well. But Miles Hinton and also the other offensive tackles, the pass pro for Michigan is not where it was last year or perhaps even where it was in 2021. I still think the run offense, despite the fact that holes aren't opening up, they're still able to execute the power run quite well, and they're able to push forward for several yards, especially on, 3rd and short or 4th and short situations. His team's very impressive. They have elite players at running back, offensive line. Every position group on the defense, I think, is a near elite or elite player. If not, they have, 2, 3, or 4 great players, which counts for elite depth. They're the number 1 team in the country in my mind for a reason. Consistent improvement on the offensive line would help. If Michigan's offensive line can imitate last year's pass protection and last year's run blocking, which was able to open up big holes against, good defenses like Penn State or Ohio State. And if Donovan Edwards can improve as a runner as well, he currently has 100 yards as a receiver, so I think he's great. All of these things will help Michigan improve and become an even better team than they are right now. They're 4-0, 1-0 in conference. J.J. McCarthy right now is 3rd in quarterback efficiency, 8 passing touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He has a 189 passer rating, and he's thrown for close to 1,000 yards. And Blake Corum and Roman Wilson are currently tied in their respective categories of rushing touchdowns and receiving touchdowns for first nationally. So this offense is good, probably great, probably near elite, maybe even elite, but I want to see the offense play more, especially after that Bowling Green game. The defense, however, I think it's safe to say they're a probably top 4-3-2 defense in all of college football. I think it's the nation's best defense as of this very moment. Thank you all for watching this video, explaining and analyzing my top 10 teams of college football. Again, if you haven't already, comment your own top 10 college football teams in the comments section. I'll try and reply to your comment. And also like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you can get notified when I post more college football content. Thank you to my patrons for sponsoring this video, my All-American patron Spencer Bringhurst, and my All-Conference patron Will Loftus, Gabriel Calendar, Roaming Gnome, and Matthew Sale. If you want to get weekly picks, along with some updates about my power rankings project that I'm working on, feel free to check out my Patreon channel and sign up. Depending on the tier, you will get insider access to the things that I just mentioned. No matter what tier you select, however, you will be thanked at the end of the video. Your support is never expected, but it will always be appreciated. Have a great day, guys, and I'll see you all later today. Bye-bye.